I found my husband's suicide note 3 days after he died. But he was still alive. My hand shook as I held the crumpled paper I'd discovered stuffed behind our bedroom radiator. The handwriting was definitely Mike's time. Those messy loops and the way he dotted his eyes with little circles. Just like he'd done since high school. But Mike was downstairs right now, washing dishes and humming that stupid song he always hummed when he was happy. Wait, let me back up. You're probably thinking this doesn't make sense. Trust me, it didn't make sense to me either. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about my marriage, something I thought I knew everything about. My name is Rabeeca, and up until 3 days ago, I thought I had the perfect life. Mike and I had been married for 12 years. We met in college, got married right after graduation, and built what everyone called a fairy tale relationship. We had a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 dogs, and enough money to take nice vacations twice a year. Mike worked as an accountant at a big firm downtown, and I taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Everyone always said we were couple goals. Our friends would joke that we never fought, never seemed stressed, and always looked happy in photos. And we were happy. At least, I thought we were. But that damn letter changed everything I thought I knew. It was a Tuesday morning. Mike had already left for work, and I was cleaning our bedroom before heading to school. Our old house had these ancient radiators that were always collecting dust and random things that fell behind them. I was vacuuming when I noticed a piece of paper wedged way back in the corner. At first, I thought it was just an old receipt or maybe something that had fallen out of Mike's pocket. But when I pulled it out and unfolded it, my heart stopped. To whoever finds this, it started. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. Rabeeca deserves better than what I've become. She deserves someone who isn't broken inside. I had to sit down on our bed. My legs felt like jelly. This was Mike's handwriting, Mike's words, but it made no sense. The letter was dated 3 days ago, last Saturday. But Saturday had been a normal day. We'd gone grocery shopping together, watched a movie on the couch, and made dinner together. Mike had seemed completely fine. Better than fine, actually. He'd been laughing at my terrible jokes and talking about wanting to plant a garden in the spring. I kept reading, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper steady. I've been lying to everyone, especially Rabeeca. She thinks I'm this stable, reliable guy who has everything figured out. But I don't. I'm drowning, and I have been for months, maybe years. The panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the constant feeling like I'm not good enough for the life we've built. It's all been too much. I tried to get help, but I couldn't even do that right. Panic attacks? What panic attacks? Mike had never mentioned anything about panic attacks. He'd never mentioned feeling like he was drowning. How could I have missed something this big? I know this will hurt her, and that kills me. Rabeeca is the best thing that ever happened to me, but I'm just dragging her down. She deserves someone who can be the husband she needs, not someone who fakes being okay every single day. I hope someday she can forgive me and find someone who can love her the way she deserves. The letter ended with, "I'm sorry for everything. Please take care of our dogs, Mike." I read it 3 times, hoping the words would change or that I'd somehow misunderstood. But no matter how many times I read it, the message was clear. My husband had been planning to kill himself, had wanted to die, had written this note, apparently hidden it, but then what? Why was he still here? Why was he downstairs right now? Probably packing his lunch for work like he did every morning. I could hear him moving around in the kitchen, The familiar sounds of our morning routine, the coffee maker beeping, the refrigerator door opening and closing, the gentle clink of his spoon stirring sugar into his coffee. Always 2 teaspoons, never more, never less. Everything sounded so normal, so perfectly, terrifyingly normal. I stuffed the letter into my purse and somehow made it through the school day. I taught my kids about fractions and helped them with reading, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time I looked at the clock, I wondered what Mike was doing. Was he sitting at his desk, doing spreadsheets and answering emails like nothing had happened? How do you write a suicide note and then just go back to your regular life? When I got home that afternoon, Mike was already there. He'd gotten off work early and was in the kitchen cooking dinner. He looked up when I walked in and smiled. That same warm, genuine smile that had made me fall in love with him 15 years ago. "Hey, babe," he said, walking over to kiss my cheek. "How was your day? Did Tommy finally turn in that math homework?" I stared at him. He looked completely normal. His eyes were bright, his hair was a little messy from running his hands through it while he cooked, and he had that little spot of pasta sauce on his shirt that he always got when he made spaghetti. This was my Mike. The same man I'd woken up next to for 15 years. The same man who left little notes in my lunch bag and always remembered to record my favorite TV shows. How could this same man have written that letter? "Rabeeca, you okay?" Mike's voice pulled me back to the moment. He was looking at me with concern, his head tilted the way it always did when he was worried about something. "Yeah, just tired," I managed to say. "Long day." He nodded and went back to stirring the sauce. "Well, dinner will be ready in about 10 minutes. Why don't you go change, and I'll finish up here." I went upstairs and sat on our bed, pulling the letter out of my purse again. The paper felt heavier now, like it was made of lead instead of just regular notebook paper. I stared at Mike's words, trying to make sense of them. How long had he been feeling this way? How had I missed it? I thought about our conversations over the past few months, looking for signs I should have noticed. Had he been trying to tell me? Had there been clues I'd ignored because I was too busy or too comfortable in our routine? The more I thought about it, the more little things started to make sense in a horrible new way. How Mike had been going to bed earlier, claiming he was just tired. How he'd stopped talking about future plans as much. No more mentions of that vacation to Italy we'd always talked about taking. No more jokes about what we'd do when we retired. How he'd seemed to hug me a little tighter lately, like he was trying to memorize how it felt. God, how could I have been so blind? "Dinner's ready," Mike called from downstairs. I quickly folded the letter and put it back in my purse. I couldn't let him know I'd found it. Not yet. I needed to understand what had happened first. Why he'd written it, what had changed his mind, and most importantly, how I could help him. We ate dinner like we always did. Mike told me about a funny email his boss had sent, and I told him about one of my students who'd brought a hamster to show and tell without permission. We laughed together, shared a piece of chocolate cake for dessert, and watched the news on the couch afterward. It was perfectly normal, and that's what made it so terrifying. Later that night, after Mike had fallen asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The man next to me, my husband, my best friend, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had wanted to die just 3 days ago, had written a goodbye letter and hidden it away. But he was here. He was breathing softly beside me, occasionally making those little sleep sounds he'd always made. He was warm and solid and alive. What had changed? What had stopped him? And most importantly, was he still in danger? I reached over in the darkness and gently touched his hand. He stirred slightly, but didn't wake up. His fingers were warm, his pulse steady under my thumb. I made a decision right then. I was going to figure out what had happened. I was going to find out why my husband had wanted to die, and I was going to make sure he knew he wasn't alone. That whatever he was going through, we could face it together. But first, I needed to understand something that was bothering me more and more as the hours passed. The letter had been hidden behind the radiator for 3 days. But our bedroom was small, and that radiator was right next to Mike's side of the bed. There was no way he could have put it there without me noticing. Not unless he'd done it while I was somewhere else. Somewhere I wouldn't see him hide what he thought would be his final words. I thought back to Saturday, trying to remember every detail. We'd gone grocery shopping in the morning, watched a movie after lunch, and then I'd gone to my sister's house. I'd gone to help her move some furniture, and I'd been gone for about 3 hours. Mike had stayed home, said he had a headache, and wanted to take a nap. That's when he'd done it. That's when he'd written the letter and hidden it, while I was at my sister's house, completely unaware that my husband was at home, planning to end his life. But he hadn't. He was still here, still breathing next to me. Tomorrow, I decided, I was going to find out why. I called in sick to work the next morning. I'd never used a mental health day in my 12 years of teaching, but I figured discovering your husband's suicide note probably qualified as an emergency. Mike left for work at his usual time. 2:07, 30 sharp coffee travel mug in one hand, briefcase in the other. He kissed me goodbye and told me to feel better soon. That same concerned look in his eyes that I now realized I'd been seeing more often lately. After his car disappeared down our street, I sat at our kitchen table and made a plan. I needed to understand what had been going on in Mike's life, what I'd missed, and why he'd changed his mind about. I started with his computer. Mike wasn't secretive about his password. It was our wedding anniversary, same as it had always been. But as I scrolled through his browsing history, I felt like I was looking at a stranger's life. Mental health forums, articles about depression and anxiety, website after website about therapy, medication, and something called high-functioning depression. There were searches for how to tell your wife you're not okay, and signs you need professional help. My heart broke a little more with every link. Mike had been researching this stuff for months. He'd been trying to figure out what was wrong with him, trying to find help, and I'd had no idea. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. In his search history from last Saturday, the day he'd written the letter, there were searches for painless ways and how to make it look like an accident. I had to step away from the computer. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to process what I'd just read. Mike hadn't just been thinking about suicide. He'd been planning it, researching it, and somehow, something had stopped him. What? I went back to the computer and kept digging. The searches stopped abruptly on Saturday around 2 p.m. Whatever had happened, whatever had changed his mind, it had happened that afternoon while I was at my sister's. I checked his email next. Most of it was just work stuff and random newsletters, but then I found something interesting. There was an email from someone named Dr. Patricia Chen, sent on Saturday at 2:47 p.m. Mike, I'm so glad you decided to call our crisis line today. As I mentioned on the phone, these feelings you're experiencing are treatable, and you don't have to go through this alone. I've attached some resources and the phone number for our emergency support line, available 24/7. Please remember what we discussed. Your wife loves you, and this feeling that you're a burden to her isn't based in reality. Depression lies to us. It makes us believe things that aren't true. I hope you'll consider coming in for an appointment this week. You took a brave step today by reaching out. That shows incredible strength. I stared at the email, tears starting to blur my vision. He'd called a crisis line, On Saturday, while I was gone, Mike had reached the point where he was ready to end his life. But instead of going through with it, he'd called for help. The email was signed with Dr. Chen's direct phone number and the address of something called the Riverside Mental Health Center. I'd driven past that place hundreds of times. It was in a small brick building downtown, just a few blocks from Mike's office. I'd always assumed it was just another medical building, never really thinking about what services they offered. But Mike had known, and he'd called them. I scrolled through the rest of his emails, looking for any follow-up appointments or responses to Dr. Chen. Nothing. As far as I could tell, he'd never responded to her email or called back. Why not? If he'd reached out for help, if someone had offered to see him, why hadn't he followed through? I spent the rest of the morning going through everything I could find. Mike's journal, which I felt terrible for reading, but desperate times, his text messages, even his work emails. Slowly, a picture started to emerge of a man who'd been struggling for much longer than I'd realized. His journal entries went back almost 2 years. They started small, just comments about feeling tired or stressed about work, but gradually they got darker. He wrote about feeling like he was faking being happy, about worrying that I would leave him if I knew how messed up he really was inside. He wrote about panic attacks that he'd hidden from me, about lying awake at night convinced that everyone in his life would be better off without him. How had I missed this? How had the person I slept next to every night, shared meals with, talked to every day, been in this much pain without me knowing? I thought about all those times over the past year when Mike had seemed a little off. Times when I'd asked if he was okay and he'd said he was just tired. Times when he'd been quieter than usual, and I'd assumed he was just thinking about work or stressed about some project. I'd been living with someone who was drowning, and I'd been completely oblivious. Around noon, I made a decision. I was going to call Dr. Chen. My hands shook as I dialed the number from her email. A receptionist answered on the second ring. Riverside Mental Health Center. This is Jessica. How can I help you? Hi, this is gonna sound strange, but my husband called your crisis line on Saturday, and I found an email from Dr. Chen. I was wondering if I could speak with her. I'm sorry, but I can't give out information about patients without their consent, even to spouses. No, I understand. I don't want information about him. I want information for me. I just found out that my husband has been struggling, and I don't know how to help him. There was a pause. Hold on. Let me see if Dr. Chen is available to speak with you. After a few minutes of hold music, a warm voice came on the line. This is Dr. Chen. I understand you're calling about your husband? Yes, Mike. Mike Johnson. He called you on Saturday. And I found his. I couldn't say the words. I see. And you're looking for guidance on how to support him? Yes. I don't know what to do. I don't know how I missed this. I don't know how to help him without making it worse. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but direct. First, you should know that it's very common for people with depression to hide their symptoms, especially from the people they love most. Your husband isn't unusual in that respect. Second, the fact that he reached out to our crisis line shows that he wants help, even if he's scared to follow through. But he never made an appointment with you. He never even responded to your email. That's also common. Taking that first step to call is enormous, but the next steps can feel overwhelming. Many people need multiple attempts before they're ready to commit to treatment. I was quiet for a moment, trying to process this. What do I do now? You can't force him to get help, Dr. Chen said. But you can create an environment where he feels safe to ask for it. Let him know you love him, no matter what. Be patient if he's not ready to talk about it right away, and take care of yourself too. Supporting someone with depression is exhausting. Should I tell him I found the letter? Another pause. That's a decision only you can make. But if you do decide to bring it up, make sure you're coming from a place of love, not anger or hurt. And be prepared that he might not be ready to have that conversation. After I hung up, I sat in our kitchen for a long time, thinking. Part of me wanted to confront Mike the minute he walked through the door, to demand answers and explanations. But the bigger part of me, the part that loved him more than anything, knew that Dr. Chen was right. I needed to be patient. I needed to let him know he was safe with me. When Mike got home from work that evening, he found me cooking his favorite meal, pot roast, with mashed potatoes and green beans. He looked surprised. "What's the occasion?" he asked, setting his briefcase down and loosening his tie. "No occasion. Just felt like making something nice." He studied my face for a moment, and I wondered if he could tell that something had changed. But then he smiled and came over to hug me from behind while I stirred the gravy. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This is really nice." We had dinner like always, but I paid attention to things I'd been missing before. How Mike pushed his food around his plate more than he actually ate it. How he asked me questions about my day but didn't volunteer much about his own. How he seemed to be watching my face carefully, like he was looking for signs that I was unhappy or disappointed in him. After dinner, we sat on the couch to watch TV. Instead of sitting on the opposite end like I usually did, I curled up next to Mike, resting my head on his shoulder. He seemed surprised, but wrapped his arms around me. "I love you," I said, looking up at him. "You know that, right?" "No matter what?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "Of course I know that. I love you too." "I mean it, Mike. No matter what you're going through, no matter what problems we might face, I love you. We're a team. Remember?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he kissed the top of my head and held me a little tighter. "We're a team," he repeated softly. That night, I lay awake again, listening to Mike's breathing. But this time, instead of feeling helpless and confused, I felt determined. My husband was in pain, but he was still here. He'd reached out for help once, which meant he could do it again. And this time, I was going to make sure he knew he didn't have to face it alone. I thought about Dr. Chen's words about creating a safe environment. I thought about all the ways I could show Mike that I loved him exactly as he was, depression and all. I thought about how to let him know that he wasn't a burden, that he wasn't broken, that he deserved help and happiness and all the good things life had to offer. But mostly, I thought about the fact that I'd almost lost him without even knowing he was in danger, and I promised myself that I would never let him feel that alone again. Tomorrow, I decided I was going to start showing him just how much he meant to me. And maybe, if I was patient enough and loving enough, he'd eventually trust me with the truth about what he'd been going through. I had no idea that the real truth was going to be so much more complicated than I'd imagined. It took 2 weeks of gentle questions and extra hugs before Mike finally broke down and told me everything. And when he did, I realized that the letter I'd found was only the beginning of the story. We were sitting on our back porch on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee and watching our dogs play in the yard. It was one of those perfect spring mornings that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. I'd been working up the courage to tell Mike about the letter for days, trying to find the right moment and the right words. But before I could say anything, Mike set down his coffee cup and turned to face me. "Rabeeca, I need to tell you something." My heart started racing. "Okay." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the yard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 weeks ago, I almost killed myself. Even though I'd been preparing for this conversation, hearing the words out loud felt like a punch to the stomach. I reached over and took his hand. "I know," I said softly. He looked at me in shock. "You know, I found the letter behind the radiator. I've known for 2 weeks." Mike's face went white. "You found it? But I thought I threw it away." "You didn't throw it away. It was hidden behind the radiator in our bedroom." He ran his free hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as something he did when he was really stressed. "God, Rabeeca, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to see that. I never wanted you to know how messed up I am." "You're not messed up," I said firmly. "You're hurting. There's a difference." And then, sitting on our back porch with the morning sun warming our faces, Mike told me everything. He told me about the depression that had been building for almost 2 years, starting so slowly that he'd barely noticed it at first. Just feeling tired more often, having trouble getting excited about things he used to love, feeling like he was going through the motions of his life instead of actually living it. He told me about the panic attacks that had started about 8 months ago. Sudden, overwhelming waves of fear and dread that would hit him at work, in the grocery store, sometimes even just sitting in our living room watching TV. He'd learned to hide them, to excuse himself to the bathroom or claim he needed some fresh air until they passed. He told me about the voice in his head that had gotten louder and meaner over time. The voice that told him he was weak, that he was failing me, that I deserved someone better. The voice that whispered that everyone would be happier if he just disappeared. "I tried to fight it at first," he said, tears starting to fall down his cheeks. "I tried to convince myself that it wasn't true, that it was just stress or work pressure or something. But it got so loud, Rabeeca, and it was so constant, every day, all day. Just this voice telling me I was worthless and that everyone I loved would be better off without me." I was crying too by then, but I didn't interrupt. Mike needed to get this out, and I needed to hear it. He told me about the research he'd done, trying to understand what was happening to him, how he'd learned about depression and anxiety, and realized that what he was experiencing had a name. But instead of making him feel better, the knowledge had somehow made everything worse. "I kept reading all these articles about how depression affects relationships," he said, "about how it's hard on spouses and families. And I became convinced that I was going to drag you down with me, that you'd eventually get tired of dealing with my problems and leave, and I couldn't bear the thought of that happening." That's when the suicidal thoughts had started. Not as a plan at first, just as a fantasy. What would happen if he just wasn't here anymore? Would I be sad for a while, then eventually move on and find someone who could make me truly happy? Someone who wasn't broken inside? "I know it sounds crazy now," Mike said, "but at the time, it felt like the most logical thing in the world, like I was being selfless instead of selfish." The thoughts had gotten stronger and more frequent over the winter. By spring, Mike was thinking about death multiple times a day. He'd started making mental lists of how he'd want things handled, what he'd want me to know, how he could do it in a way that would cause the least amount of pain for everyone else. "That Saturday, when you went to help your sister move, I had the worst panic attack I'd ever had," Mike continued. "I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. I was convinced I was having a heart attack. But when it finally passed, instead of feeling relieved, I felt empty, like I'd used up all my energy fighting it, and I had nothing left." That's when he'd written the letter. Not as a plan exactly, but as a way of organizing his thoughts. of putting down on paper all the things he wanted me to know if something happened to him. "I was going to do it," he said quietly. "I had pills saved up, and I was going to take them and just go to sleep. But then I started thinking about you coming home and finding me, and I couldn't do that to you. So I decided to call you first, to tell you I loved you one more time." But when Mike had picked up the phone to call me, he'd accidentally dialed the wrong number. Instead of reaching me at my sister's house, he'd somehow dialed the crisis hotline number he'd seen on one of the mental health websites he'd been reading. When the person answered, I almost hung up, Mike said. But something about her voice, she sounded so calm and kind, so I stayed on the line. The crisis counselor, Dr. Chen, had talked to Mike for almost an hour. She'd helped him understand that the thoughts he was having weren't rational, that depression was literally changing the way his brain processed information. She'd helped him realize that his belief that everyone would be better off without him was a symptom of his illness, not an actual fact. She asked me to make a promise, Mike said, to wait 24 hours before making any permanent decisions, to give myself time to think clearly. And she made me promise to call her back if the feelings got overwhelming again. Mike had agreed. He'd hidden the letter behind the radiator, not because he'd decided not to go through with it, but because he wanted to wait until he was thinking more clearly to decide whether or not it said what he really wanted it to say. "But then you came home," Mike said, looking at me with wonder in his eyes. "And you were so happy to see me. You started telling me about your day, and you were laughing about something funny your nephew had said, and I realized I didn't want to miss moments like that. I didn't want to miss your laugh or your stories or the way you always steal bites of my dessert even when you order your own." That night, Mike had made another promise to himself. He was going to try to get better. He was going to try to fight the voice in his head that told him he was worthless. And if he couldn't do it alone, he was going to ask for help. "But I kept chickening out," he admitted. "Every time I thought about telling you what was going on, I'd convince myself that you'd be disappointed in me, that you'd think I was weak or broken. I kept putting it off, telling myself I'd tell you tomorrow, or next week, or when I felt a little bit better. And now?" I asked gently. Mike looked at me, his eyes red from crying, but somehow clearer than they'd been in months. "Now I'm terrified that you're going to look at me differently, that you're going to think you married someone other than who I really am." I set down my coffee cup and turned to face him fully. "Mike, listen to me. The man I married is someone who's kind and funny and loyal and smart. Someone who remembers my favorite movies and leaves me little notes in my lunch bag and always makes sure my car has gas in it even when I forget to fill it up myself." Mike started to say something, but I held up my hand. "That man is still you. Depression doesn't change who you are as a person. It's something that's happening to you, not something you are. And the fact that you fought it, that you called for help when you needed it, that you chose to stay here with me, that shows me exactly who you are. You're someone who fights for the people he loves, even when the fight is harder than anything else he's ever done." We sat there crying together for a while, holding hands and watching our dogs chase each other around the yard. "I want to get better," he said. "I want to call Dr. Chen back and make that appointment I never made. But I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that I'm too broken to fix. Scared that even with help, I'll never be the husband you deserve." I squeezed his hand tighter. "You already are the husband I deserve. You're the husband I chose, and I choose you again every single day, depression and all." That afternoon, Mike called Dr. Chen. They made an appointment for the following Thursday. It was the first of many appointments, the first step in what would turn out to be a long journey toward healing. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and bad days and times when Mike's depression tried to convince him that therapy wasn't working, that he wasn't getting better, that he should just give up. But he kept going, and I learned how to be a partner to someone with depression. How to offer support without trying to fix everything, how to recognize warning signs, how to take care of myself so I could be there for him. 6 months later, Mike was doing so much better. He was on medication that helped balance his brain chemistry, and he'd learned coping strategies in therapy that helped him manage his anxiety and challenge the negative thoughts when they tried to take over. He still had bad days. Depression isn't something that just disappears forever, but he had tools now to deal with them. More importantly, he had hope. The night of our 13th wedding anniversary, Mike gave me a card that made me cry all over again. Inside, in his messy handwriting, he'd written, "Thank you for loving me through the darkness and helping me find my way back to the light. Thank you for choosing me every day, even when I couldn't choose myself. You saved my life in more ways than you'll ever know." But he was wrong about that last part. I knew exactly how he'd saved mine too. Because the truth is, finding that letter didn't just save Mike's life. It saved our marriage. It forced us to have conversations we should have been having all along, to really see each other instead of just going through the motions of being together. It taught us that love isn't just about the good times and the easy moments. It's about showing up for each other when things get dark and scary and complicated. That letter, the one I'd found crumpled behind our radiator, turned out to be the beginning of our real love story. The one where we learned that you can't protect the people you love from pain, but you can promise to face that pain together. The one where we learned that, for better or worse, isn't just something you say at a wedding. It's something you choose to live every single day. Mike still has that appointment with Dr. Chen every Thursday. I still find little notes in my lunch bag. Our dogs still chase each other around the backyard on Sunday mornings. But now we talk about the hard things too. We talk about mental health and medication and bad days and good days and all the messy, complicated, beautiful parts of being human. And sometimes, when Mike is having a particularly difficult day, I remind him of something Dr. Chen told us during one of the sessions I was allowed to attend. Healing isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming more fully yourself. The Mike I'm married to now isn't different from the Mike I fell in love with 15 years ago. He's just more honestly, completely, courageously himself. And that's the most beautiful love story I could have ever asked for. If Sarah and Mike's story touched your heart, you're not alone. Right now, someone you know might be fighting a battle you can't see. They might be smiling on the outside while drowning on the inside, just like Mike was. Here's what I want you to remember. You are not a burden. You are not broken. You are not too much for the people who love you. Depression lies. Anxiety lies. That voice in your head that tells you everyone would be better off without you, it's lying too. And if you're the Sarah in someone's life, if you suspect someone you love is struggling, don't wait for them to ask for help. Create that safe space. Say, "I love you no matter what," and mean it. Sometimes the people who need help most are the ones who seem to have it all together. Mental health struggles don't make you weak. Asking for help doesn't make you a failure. Choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing to reach out, that takes incredible courage. If you're struggling right now, please reach out. Call a friend, call a family member, or call a crisis line. If this story reminded you why love and hope matter, please hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories about real people facing real struggles and finding their way through, subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them most. Remember, you matter. Your life has value. And somewhere out there, Someone's world is brighter because you're in it. Take care of yourself and take care of each other. Until next time.